Good morning, guys. This is Brent with Lykins Motorsports, fighting through some allergies. I know I'll get some hateful comments from the peanut gallery, but the show must go on. We're going to be trying to get as much done as we can today with this 464-inch Clevor. So we ended up getting our rocker stands milled and clearanced. I'm going to get all of our intake rockers on today and measure for our exhaust push rod. Got the intake manifold cut. We needed to take 60 thousandths off the flanges to make everything line up perfectly. We got that in. We got our carburetors. We got our linkages, intake push rods, carb spacers. Everything is set up, so we'll get a lot done today. We got our fuel pressure regulator, and I've got a lot of AN hoses and fittings that we can get plumbed up. So we can get the bag off the engine and get started. All right, so we're gonna put our intake side of the rocker arms on. What I'm doing here is, since we're having to use some shims to get our geometry right, I'm putting on some grease so that I can place those shims in the right spots and they won't move around. So like that. That way when I go to set the bar on and moving the bolts and everything through there, that I won't have any problems with the alignment. If you also notice, this is the hole that the bolts mount to. This is the intake port. You can see my finger in there moving. So each bolt that goes in those holes will need to have thread sealant on it. Otherwise, it'll pull oil down through there, and then you have things that are not good. On the other side now, we're going to do the same thing. Just keep in mind that a lot of your aftermarket cylinder heads, AFR, trick flow, that sort of thing, even if you're using rocker arm studs, they can sometimes go into the port. So just be very careful when you're setting everything up. Make sure you put thread sealant on everything you need to put thread sealant on. Okay, typically on, our hydraulic roller builds and things like that, we'll use a 5/16 diameter push rod. On this one, we're using a 1/2 inch push rod on the intake side. We'll see what we can get away with on the exhaust side here in a minute. But here's the difference in between the length. These things are pretty massive. We're going to use some of this CMD pressure lube on each side of the push rod tip. Give us some extra protection on startup with the spring loads that we have. Then it's just a matter of putting our individual rocker arms on. I don't know why I'm struggling here, but I am. So we'll loosen up the adjuster, bolt them down, set our valve lash. Exhaust lifter is coming up, so we know that our intake lifter is on the base circle of the cam. Okay, as I'm putting these on, again, I'm checking to make sure we have clearance in the critical spots. We've got clearance in between our rocker arm and our push rod. We've got clearance in between, the lifter, link bar retainer, and the push rod. We have clearance in between the head and the push rod. Okay, passenger side intake rockers are done. We'll get over to the driver's side. All right, so now we're mocking up our geometry for our exhaust rocker arm. I've got it's a 5/16 push rod, but it's got it set to the actual length that we need. Push rod length checkers tend to deflect or sometimes they even break under spring load. So we've got everything the way that it should be. We're just gonna roll this over a couple times and see what kind of pattern we get. And here's our pattern. It's a little bit wide, and what I'm gonna try is a 30,000 shim under this stand. I cut this by 60, just in case I needed to drop it a lot, and then, you know, we got shims so we can build it back up. But take this out, throw a 30,000 shim under it, and see what that does to our pattern. All right, so I've spent literally the past hour and a half working on this, trying to get everything lined up. Turns out that the best geometry, I've spent so long on it that I didn't even video it, but turns out the best geometry that I could find was with a 60,000 shim underneath this exhaust stand. So we're back to where we were. That's the best that I can get. So with that being said, I'm gonna pull this push rod out. This is a 3/8 push rod, and I have enough room for a 7/16, and that's about it. So the exhaust side, we're gonna measure for it, and we're gonna order some heavy wall 7/16 dual taper push rods. So I'll put my push rod length checker in here, put my rocker arm back on, and set the rocker. Remember, we want one full turn down from all the way out. So I'll use that in combination with my feeler gauge, and we'll get this push rod length checked. All right, so got our push rods ordered, got our rocker arms just sitting on here for storage sake. We're gonna turn our attention to our intake manifold. I had to have 60 thousandths cut off the flanges to make it work perfectly. And you can see the ports are lined up the way that they should be. So there's nothing that's gonna stop me from bolting this thing on. We're gonna take a look at our China wall gap, and it looks like we got about a little over 1/8 of an inch. So that's about how much the silicone that I'll need for the China wall. We're gonna use some white lithium grease on the gasket side so that in the event that the intake comes off, it'll be easy to get off without any prying. And we'll get this puppy bolted on. Okay, our intake is bolted on. Got these socket head screws, stainless, to hold it on. Again, port alignment is perfect. We're gonna put our carb studs in, and I've already had all this mocked up. That's why you see a little bit of silicone and stuff on here, but carb studs are a through hole. So we're gonna put some thread sealant on these before we screw them in, just so nothing can suck any air by those. Next goes our first round of carburetor gaskets. and our super suckers. So those can do a couple different things. Straighten the airflow in from the carburetor to each individual runner, and also they give us the distance that we need to keep the butter or the linkages off the carburetor off the intake manifold. And we do more gaskets. It is so impossible to do this stuff one-handed. Next, go on our two 850 carburetors. These were built by Scott Perkins for me for this engine, set up for a sheet metal intake. Already set up the linkages. This took me a good hour or so, a week or so ago. So we'll get our nuts on here and put our linkage in for our little bell crank assembly, and we'll move onward. All right, got our linkages on. Got wide open throttle, nothing is binding. So we're in good shape, got our distributor in, distributor clamp. Now we can turn our attention to the fuel pressure regulator, which I'm gonna hang back here. And we've already got our fuel inlet fittings in the carburetors. These are -6s. They're gonna go into a 4-port fuel pressure regulator with a -10 inlet to make sure that we got enough fuel to feed this beast. And yeah, so progress. Let me get this fuel pressure regulator out of the box. I'll show it to you. This is a Magna fuel pressure regulator. 4 -6 outlets, 1 -10 inlet. Got a little mounting bracket, and we'll stick it right there and run our fuel lines to it. It's also got a gauge port, so we'll screw a fuel pressure gauge in there. Guys think that the higher the fuel pressure, the more horsepower you make. You do not want to overpressurize these carburetors. 5 or 6 pounds is plenty, and you can do damage by going higher than that. But we'll get this guy mounted, and we'll start running our fuel lines. Okay, so this is where it'll be mounted for the dyno. This can be mounted anywhere in the car once the engine's in the car. May need to make up some different fuel lines, but for dyno purposes and to keep everything out of the way of the carb linkages and that sort of thing, this is about the best place that I could think to put it. So we're putting in our Vibrant -6 O-ring fittings. These lines will go to each inlet on the carburetors, and then we can put in our -10 feed line. But yeah, like I was saying, this can be mounted anywhere, even when valve cover's on and you know there's room to move about the engine. You can move this over to here or mount it to your fender well or firewall or whatever. But we're going to get some hoses made up real quick and get all this buttoned up. These are a little tight fit, so what we'll probably have to do is do 2 lines and get those tightened up, and then do the other 2 lines. Otherwise, when we screw this in here, I don't think we're going to have enough room to tighten the hose end on this side. So I have to do 2 and 2. These are hose ends from Vibrant Performance. I like using these. These and Frigola are very high quality and not as expensive as some of the other brands. But the fittings and the hoses, I easily have to allocate about $400 or $500 in the budget for the engine when we do vacuum pumps and dual carburetors and dry sumps and all that stuff, just because the hoses and the fittings rack up to so much money. Alright, so I've done a lot of work since I've chimed in last. You guys don't want to see me make up a bunch of hoses. It's boring. But here we are. All plumbed up, all ready to go. Got our Autolite spark plugs in, MSD plug wires. Distributors in, clock to the correct position. Just waiting on some valve cover work and our vacuum pump to come in. GZ said that they were a week or two behind, so just patiently waiting on, sorry, I seen a speck of dirt there. Waiting on the vacuum pump to come in. And push rods, so almost done. We'll get to hear it run. You guys have been asking how much horsepower I think it's gonna make. I honestly don't know. I haven't done one with the sheet metal intake and 2 carburetors, so I'm not for sure. The last 460-ish cubic inch Clevor that I did made 720 horsepower on pump gas with 1 carburetor and obviously pump gas compression and an aluminum block. So that's the only that's the only real standard I have to go by to compare against. So this one has 13-to-1 compression, bigger cam, sheet metal intake, more carburation, vacuum pump. So I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Maybe we'll do a guess the horsepower on this one. All right, guys, I hope you have been having a good week, and hope you have a good weekend. I'm going to try to get back and do some work on little JJ Jr. over there. He hasn't been to the dyno since we tried the E303 cam. I'd like to get some valve covers on him that look halfway decent. But I'll probably take this one and that one at the same time, since they're both small blocks and it requires less swap out of parts on the dyno, that sort of thing. So we'll see how that works. All right, guys, have a good weekend, and I'll catch you next week. Hopefully we'll have some valve covers and some vacuum pump stuff to bolt on. All right, take care.